The Pacific breeze carried salt and the scent of grilled steak through the open windows of Harborview Steakhouse, mixing with the low murmur of Friday evening conversation. Garrett Sullivan rolled his wheelchair through the entrance, nodding at the hostess who'd seen him here twice before, both times alone, both times leaving early. Tonight felt different. Tonight his daughter was coming home. 4 years, 18 deployments he couldn't ask about. Conversations reduced to static-filled satellite calls where she'd say she was fine, and he'd pretend to believe her. But the calendar on his refrigerator had today circled in red marker the word Jade, written in his careful accountant's script, underlined 3 times. The hostess led him to the corner table he'd requested, the one with the unobstructed view of the marina where sailboats bobbed against their moorings. Garrett positioned his chair at an angle, leaving space for another seat. His hands trembled slightly as he smoothed the napkin across his lap. Not the palsy of age, but anticipation mixed with a fear he wouldn't name. What if 4 years had changed her into someone he didn't recognize? What if she looked at him and saw only what he saw in the mirror? Each morning, a man whose legs had stopped working in a desert half a world away, whose wife had died while he sat helpless, whose greatest act of courage now involved filing complaints with bureaucrats who didn't return his calls. The investigation into Golden Horizon Veterans Alliance had consumed 9 months of his life. 9 months of late nights squinting at tax documents, cross-referencing grant applications with financial disclosures, building spreadsheets that mapped money flowing in and disappearing into accounts that existed only on paper. He'd submitted 847 pages to Inspector General Agent Derek Flynn 3 weeks ago, each page a small rebellion against the helplessness that had defined him since the IED blast in Kandahar took his legs and eventually his marriage to normalcy. His phone buzzed. A text from Jade. "Parking now, Diesel's excited. Me too." Garrett's throat tightened. She'd brought the dog. He hadn't seen Diesel since the animal completed SEAL K-9 training 2 years back, a Belgian Malinois with eyes that missed nothing and loyalty that bordered on supernatural. The Navy had paired them because Jade needed a partner who wouldn't question orders, and Diesel needed a handler who understood that survival meant trusting your team even when logic screamed a retreat. The restaurant door opened. Garrett turned, and time performed the trick it only manages during reunions and disasters. It collapsed into a single crystallized moment where past and present fused. Jade stood in civilian-clothes jeans, a navy blue Henley that hugged shoulders broader than he remembered, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that couldn't quite contain the wildness of 4 years lived on forward operating bases. She was scanning the room with the methodical sweep of someone trained to identify threats before threats identified her. Their eyes met. Her face broke into a smile that erased the careful control, and suddenly she was across the restaurant, kneeling beside his wheelchair, arms wrapped around him with a fierceness that spoke of too many close calls and not enough homecomings. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. Words felt inadequate, a poor translation of what 4 years of absence and survival had earned them. When they finally pulled apart, Garrett saw tears on her cheeks. Not sadness, but the overflow of relief that comes from confirming someone you love still exists outside of memory and worry. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, laughing at herself. "I promised myself I wouldn't cry." He reached up and touched her face the way he used to when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. "I promised myself the same thing." She stood, and he noticed a slight hitch in her movement, the way her left hand instinctively went to her lower back, small tells that suggested injury, or at least pain managed rather than healed. Before he could ask, a low whine drew his attention to the doorway where Diesel sat at perfect attention, watching Jade for the signal that would release him from obedience into affection. Jade glanced at the hostess, who nodded permission. "Diesel, come." The dog moved like controlled chaos, all muscle and precision, crossing to their table and immediately positioning himself between Jade's chair and the rest of the restaurant. His eyes never stopped moving, cataloging exits and angles, a warrior's assessment happening behind the facade of a loyal pet. The waitress arrived with menus, pausing to admire Diesel before launching into her pitch about specials and wine pairings. Garrett ordered water. Jade asked for the same. The waitress left, and they were alone again, or as alone as you could be in a restaurant filling with San Diego's Friday night crowd. Jade leaned forward, her voice low but urgent. "How are you really, Dad? Not the version you tell me on satellite calls. The truth." He wanted to deflect, to insist he was fine, that her homecoming wasn't the moment to burden her with his fights. But the look in her eyes, the one that said she'd survived worse than whatever truth he was protecting her from, demanded honesty. Before he could answer, a commotion erupted near the entrance. 5 young men in clothes that cost more than Garrett's monthly rent stumbled through the door, already drunk, already loud. The hostess approached them with the practiced smile of someone paid to tolerate excess, asking if they had a reservation. The tallest of the group, maybe 19, with the kind of face that had never been told no, and the arrogance of someone who'd never faced consequences, waved her off. "We don't need reservations. You know who my father is?" The hostess maintained her smile, but her eyes flicked toward the manager's office. "Sir, we're fully booked tonight, but I can add your name to the wait list." "Wait list?" He laughed, a sound without humor. "That table's empty." He pointed directly at Garrett and Jade. "Oceanfront view, we'll take that one." The restaurant's ambient noise dipped as conversations paused, attention drawn to the confrontation. Garrett felt Jade's posture shift beside him, subtle but unmistakable. She'd gone from relaxed to ready in the space of a heartbeat. The hostess tried again. "That table is occupied, sir. If you'd like, I can—" The young man ignored her, walking straight toward Garrett's table with his friends trailing behind like a pack following their alpha. Up close, Garrett could see the glaze in his eyes, the chemical shine of someone mixing alcohol with other decisions. Designer jeans, a shirt that probably cost $300, shoes that gleamed with newness. Money and entitlement wrapped in a frame that had never known real hardship. He stopped at their table, looking down at Garrett with the kind of assessment usually reserved for obstacles one was deciding whether to move or simply step over. "This table's got a better view. You don't mind moving, right?" Garrett kept his voice level, the same tone he used when explaining tax discrepancies to clients who didn't want to hear they owed money. "My daughter just got home from deployment. First dinner we've had together in 4 years. So yes, I do mind." The young man's eyes flicked to Jade, a quick up-down evaluation that lingered too long on her face or body. "Deployment, huh? What were you deployed as, a nurse, HR specialist?" His friends laughed on cue, the kind of rehearsed mockery that spoke to years of shared cruelty. Jade didn't respond. Her hands remained on the table, but Garrett saw her fingers curl slightly, a small tell he'd learned to recognize when she was younger, and some kid at school had pushed her past patience into action. The young man turned his attention back to Garrett, and something in his expression shifted. Not recognition exactly, but a flicker of connection forming. "Wait, Sullivan, your name's Sullivan." Garrett felt ice slide down his spine. "That's right." The young man's face split into a grin that held no warmth. "Holy shit. You're the asshole trying to destroy Golden Horizon." He pulled out his phone, scrolling quickly, then turned the screen to show his friends. "My dad showed me your complaint. Said you were some bitter cripple making up fraud accusations for attention." One of his friends leaned in to look. "That's him. Dude looks pathetic." The leader, because that's clearly what he was, the one the others deferred to, pocketed his phone and crossed his arms. "My father's on Golden Horizon's board, Senator Frederick Whitmore. Maybe you've heard of him." The pride in his voice was obvious, the kind of pride that came from believing proximity to power made you powerful. He said, "Veterans like you are always looking for handouts, trying to scam the system because you couldn't hack it in the real world." The words landed like physical blows. Garrett's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "Your father's on the board of an organization that's stolen over $400 million from disabled veterans. I've documented every transaction, every shell company, every offshore account. So if he told you I'm making accusations, he's right. If he told you they're false, he's lying." The young man's face darkened. "You calling my father a liar?" Jade's voice cut through the tension, quiet but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "He's calling him a thief. There's a difference." The young man's attention snapped to her, and Garrett saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. Woman smaller than him, seated, probably thinks she's tough because she wore a uniform. Every assumption visible in the curl of his lip. He leaned down, bringing his face level with Jade's, close enough that she'd smell the bourbon on his breath. "You know what I think? I think your dad's a loser who can't accept he's useless, so he's trying to tear down an organization that actually helps veterans. And I think you're just as pathetic, coming back from whatever easy desk job they gave you, pretending you're some kind of hero." Garrett saw it happening in slow motion, the young man's throat working his mouth, pulling into that particular shape that preceded the unforgivable. The globule of saliva left his lips in a lazy arc, catching the restaurant's ambient light before it hit Garrett's face just above his left eye, warm and viscous and designed to humiliate. The restaurant went silent. Not the quiet of paused conversation, but the profound stillness that follows a violation everyone witnessed, but no one quite believes happened. Garrett sat motionless, the spit sliding down his temple toward his cheek. His hands gripped the wheelchair's armrest, knuckles white. Humiliation burned through him, not just the act itself, but the public nature of it, the calculated cruelty of being degraded in front of his daughter during what was supposed to be a celebration. In front of strangers who were already pulling out phones, already recording, already transforming his degradation into content for their feeds. The young man straightened, laughing. "Clean yourself up, cripple. You're embarrassing your daughter." Something changed in the air, a shift in pressure, in possibility. Garrett felt it before he saw it, Jade's absolute stillness, the kind that preceded violence, the way silence preceded thunder. Her voice came out flat, empty of everything except intention. "Apologize, now." The young man turned to her, his grin widening. "Or what, babe, you gonna—" He didn't finish the sentence. Jade moved with the kind of speed that looked slow, only because it was so efficient. No wasted motion, no telegraphing. She stood, her right hand intercepting his wrist mid-gesture, her left hand already moving to control his elbow. She stepped inside, his reach, her body becoming the fulcrum that leveraged his own weight against him. And suddenly he was airborne, rotating, his surprised shout cut off as his face met the table with a sound like a mallet hitting steak. The restaurant erupted into gasps and shouts. The young man's friends surged forward, but a low growl stopped them cold. Diesel had materialized from beneath the table, positioning himself between them and Jade, with his teeth visible, his body coiled with the promise of violence if they took another step. Jade kept the young man pinned, one knee pressed into his spine, his arm twisted at an angle that spoke to her absolute control over his capacity for movement. Blood ran from his nose where it had connected with the table's edge, pooling around the silverware. She leaned down, her mouth close to his ear, her voice carrying to Garrett, but to no one else. "You spit on my father. You called him pathetic. You disrespected a man who lost his legs fighting for your right to be an entitled piece of shit." She increased pressure on his arm, not enough to break, but enough to make the possibility real. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to him. You're going to clean your spit off his face with your own shirt. And then you're going to leave this restaurant and never come near my family again. Understood?" The young man tried to struggle, but Jade applied pressure to a nerve cluster that made him yelp. "I asked if you understood." Through gritted teeth, pain making his voice thin. "Yes." Jade released him slightly enough that he could turn his head, could see Garrett through watering eyes. "Apologize." For a moment, Garrett thought he'd refuse, pride warring with pain, entitlement battling reality. But pain won, as it usually did when applied with precision. "I'm sorry." The words came out forced, inadequate. Jade's knee pressed harder into his spine. "Better than that." He swallowed, tasted his own blood. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I shouldn't have. I'm sorry." Jade looked at Garrett, her eyes asking a question he answered with a small nod. She stepped back, releasing the young man, but staying close enough to intervene if he tried anything stupid. He pushed himself up slowly, his expensive shirt ruined with blood and his own fluids, his face already swelling. "Now clean it off him," Jade said. The young man looked at his friends, looking for support or intervention, but they were frozen. Diesel's attention equally divided between them and their leader. He stripped off his shirt, revealing a gym-built physique that had never been tested by anything real, and approached Garrett with the uncertain movements of someone whose world had just been violently recalibrated. He reached out with the shirt hands shaking and gently wiped the spit from Garrett's face. Up close, Garrett could see tears mixing with the blood on the young man's face. Not tears of pain, but of humiliation, the kind that came from having your self-image shattered in front of witnesses. When he finished, he stepped back, holding the ruined shirt uselessly. Jade gestured toward the door. "Leave." They left, all five of them, the young man cradling his arm, his friends supporting him. Their earlier bravado evaporated. The restaurant's other patrons watched them go in silence, and then unexpectedly someone began clapping. Others joined, building into applause that made Garrett's cheeks burn with embarrassment that felt different from the humiliation of moments before. Jade sat down, her breathing barely elevated, her hands steady as she picked up her water glass. Diesel resumed his position beneath the table as if nothing had happened. The manager appeared, a thin man in his 50s, with worry etched into every line of his face. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Sullivan. I've called the police. They're on their way." Garrett found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "Did anyone get clear video?" "At least 7 people raised their phones." The manager nodded. "Several guests captured everything." "Good." Garrett looked at Jade, saw the slight tremor starting in her hands. Now that the adrenaline was fading, the cost of violence always paid in the aftermath. "I want to press charges, assault, public humiliation, whatever applies." The manager nodded vigorously. "Of course, absolutely. And please, your meal tonight is complimentary. It's the least we can do." Jade finally spoke, her voice carrying an edge Garrett hadn't heard before. "Who was that Preston Whitmore?" The manager said the name with the careful neutrality of someone discussing a landmine. "Senator Frederick Whitmore's son. He comes in sometimes with his friends. Usually we try to seat them away from other guests." "Why?" Garrett asked, though he suspected he knew. "Because this isn't the first time there's been an incident, but it's the first time anyone's—" He gestured vaguely at the table where Preston's blood was already being cleaned by a busboy. "Most people don't want the trouble. The senator has influence." Jade's jaw tightened. "Dad, tell me about Golden Horizon, all of it. Why did Preston Whitmore recognize your name?" Before Garrett could answer, the restaurant doors opened again and 2 San Diego police officers entered. The manager intercepted them, pointing toward Garrett's table, and they approached with the particular wariness cops develop when called to situations involving violence and influential families. The older officer, mid-40s, with a weathered face that suggested too many years working nights, pulled out a notebook. "Mr. Sullivan, we got a call about an assault." Garrett nodded toward the manager. "Your complainant would be Preston Whitmore. He spat on me. My daughter intervened." The younger officer glanced at Jade, taking in her posture the controlled readiness that never quite left. "You're the daughter, Lieutenant Jade Sullivan, Navy SEAL, home on leave." Something shifted in the officer's demeanor. Not quite deference, but recognition of shared professional boundaries. The older cop pocketed his notebook. "Multiple witnesses say the Whitmore kid initiated, spat on you, made threats. Your daughter's response," he paused, choosing words carefully, "was arguably within the bounds of defense of another. But Preston's friends are claiming assault." "I have video," offered a woman from a nearby table, holding up her phone. "Clear footage of everything. The spit, the threats, all of it." The younger officer collected her contact information while his partner turned back to Garrett. "Mr. Sullivan, off the record, the Whitmore kid's a problem. We picked him up 6 times in 2 years. DUI, assault, possession. His father makes calls, charges disappear. But this time, there's video witnesses and—" He glanced at Jade again. "You've got credibility. If you want to press charges, we'll file the report. Just know it might not go anywhere." Garrett felt something crystallize in his chest, the same cold clarity that had driven him through 9 months of investigation. The same refusal to accept that power meant immunity. "File the report. I want it on record." The officer nodded. "Your call will need statements from both of you." They spent the next 40 minutes walking the officers through what happened, their accounts corroborated by 7 different phone videos and a dozen witnesses. The manager provided security footage from the restaurant's cameras. Throughout it all, Garrett watched Jade's face, seeing the careful control she maintained, the way she answered questions with military precision while her hands slowly stopped shaking. When the police finally left, promising to follow up within 48 hours, the restaurant had emptied to half capacity. Their food had arrived while they were giving statements, steaks gone cold, vegetables congealed. The waitress offered to have the kitchen remake everything, but Garrett declined. His appetite had died somewhere between being spat on and watching his daughter defend him with the kind of violence that should have felt excessive, but instead felt exactly right. Jade picked at her food, pushing rice around her plate. "Dad, Golden Horizon. Why does Senator Whitmore's son know your name?" Garrett pulled the napkin from his lap, folded it carefully, buying time to organize thoughts he'd been avoiding for 3 weeks. 3 weeks ago, I submitted an 847-page complaint to the Inspector General's office. Evidence of fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. Golden Horizon Veterans Alliance has received $420 million in federal grants over 16 years. I can prove they've only spent $89 million on actual veteran services. Jade's fork stopped moving. $331 million stolen. Laundered through shell companies, moved to offshore accounts used to purchase luxury assets. I have bank transfers, property records, emails between board members discussing how to hide transactions. He met her eyes, seeing the question forming before she asked it. Senator Whitmore's name appears on 73 pages of my evidence. He's not just on the board, he's a primary beneficiary. Jesus Christ, Dad. She pushed her plate away. You went after a sitting U.S. senator with fraud charges and didn't tell me you were deployed, unreachable, and I didn't want— He stopped search for honesty. I didn't want you to worry about me when you were dealing with real threats. Real threats. Her voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables. She lowered it again, leaning forward. Dad, you just got spat on by a senator's son who clearly knew who you were. That wasn't random. That was a message. The words hung between them, and Garrett felt the weight of his daughter's intelligence, her training in reading threats and patterns. She was right, of course. Preston Whitmore showing up tonight, recognizing Garrett's name from a complaint that should have been confidential, knowing enough to call him an asshole trying to destroy Golden Horizon. None of that was coincidence. His phone buzzed, a text from a number he didn't recognize. Check your door when you get home. He showed it to Jade. She pulled out her own phone, typed quickly, her thumbs flying across the screen with practiced speed. I'm calling base security, getting a trace on that number. Jade, don't. She held up a hand, the gesture firm. Don't tell me you're fine. Don't tell me this is just angry people sending empty threats. That kid tonight knew your name from a confidential complaint. Someone leaked it to his father, who showed it to his drunk asshole son. That means the Inspector General's office is compromised, or the senator has sources inside federal investigators, or both. Either way, you're not safe. Garrett felt something crack inside him, not his resolve, but the wall he'd built between his investigation and his daughter's homecoming. He'd wanted tonight to be about her, about celebration and normalcy. Instead, it had become about his fight, his choices, his inability to protect himself or her from the consequences of standing up. I'm sorry, he said quietly. This isn't how tonight was supposed to go. She reached across the table, took his hand, her grip strong, calloused from years of handling weapons and climbing ropes, but also gentle in a way that reminded him of when she was small and he was the one doing the protecting. Dad, I'm not mad that you investigated fraud. I'm mad you didn't trust me enough to tell me. I'm a Navy SEAL. I've infiltrated hostile territories, run operations against targets that would kill me if they found me. You think I can't handle helping you take down some corrupt charity executives? It's not about what you can handle. It's about— He stopped, recognizing the futility of finishing that sentence. It's about me being your father. That doesn't stop just because you learned how to kill people with your bare hands. A smile flickered across her face, brief but genuine. Fair point. The smile faded. But I'm home now, and whatever's coming because of your investigation, we face it together. Understood. He wanted to argue, to insist she'd done her part for God and country, that her leave should be spent recovering, not protecting her disabled father from criminals in suits. But the look in her eyes, the one that said arguing would be disrespectful to everything she'd become, stopped him. Understood. They left the restaurant 20 minutes later, Garrett's wheelchair rolling through a gauntlet of sympathetic looks and a few more words of support from strangers who'd witnessed the confrontation. The manager insisted their next visit would be complimentary, as well, pressing a business card into Garrett's hand with his personal cell number written on the back. Outside, the parking lot stretched under LED lights that turned everything slightly blue. Jade had parked in the disabled space closest to the entrance, a lifted Jeep Wrangler with military plates and modifications that suggested off-road capability far beyond civilian needs. She opened the passenger door, helped Garrett transfer from wheelchair to seat with practiced efficiency, then collapsed the chair and loaded it in the back. Diesel jumped into the rear, immediately positioning himself to watch both the restaurant and the surrounding lot. Even at rest, the dog maintained a state of readiness that made Garrett understand why the military spent years training these animals. Jade climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, but didn't shift into gear. Instead, she pulled out her phone, opened an app Garrett didn't recognize, and tapped through several screens. I'm setting up a security protocol. Motion sensors on your apartment building's entrances. Camera feeds routed to my phone alert system if anyone approaches your door. You can do that. I have friends in low places. She glanced at him, a hint of humor breaking through her concern. Also, the NSA owes me a favor, but that's classified. He didn't know if she was joking. With Jade, the line between capability and impossibility had always been blurry. They drove through San Diego's evening traffic in silence. Jade's eyes constantly moving, checking mirrors, scanning intersections, cataloging vehicles that stayed behind them too long. The training never shut off, Garrett realized. Even here in a civilian city during peacetime, she was running threat assessments, planning escape routes, preparing for violence that probably wouldn't come, but might. His apartment complex was a converted motel from the 1970s, 2 stories of faded paint and functional ugliness. He'd moved here after Beth died, downsizing from the house that held too many memories and required mobility he no longer possessed. The rent was cheap, the location convenient to VA services, and the landlord didn't ask questions about his work-from-home accounting practice. Jade parked, killed the engine, and immediately went still, the kind of stillness that preceded action. "Dad, your door." Garrett looked up at his second-floor apartment. The door stood half-open, darkness beyond. "I locked it this morning, triple-checked." Jade already had her phone out, dialing. "This is Lieutenant Sullivan. I need police at the Seaside Apartments, 472, 5 Mission, Bay Drive, Apartment 2B, possible break-in." She listened, responded with details, then hung up. 5 minutes. "We should wait for them." She was already out of the Jeep. "Diesel with me." The dog jumped down, falling into position at her left side. Jade opened the center console, pulled out something Garrett couldn't quite see in the darkness, and tucked it into the small of her back. When she moved, he caught the outline, a handgun compact, the kind SEALs carried when they wanted concealable lethality. "Jade, stay in the Jeep, Dad. Lock the doors. If anyone comes near you who isn't me or a cop, lean on the horn." She moved toward the stairs with Diesel, both of them flowing through shadow like they'd been born to it. Garrett watched them ascend, his heart hammering against ribs that felt suddenly fragile. His daughter was climbing toward a potentially occupied apartment. Could be thieves, could be nothing. Could be someone sent by Golden Horizon to deliver a message more permanent than a text. He pulled out his phone, typed a message to Inspector General Flynn. "Someone broke into my apartment. Same night Preston Whitmore assaulted me. Not a coincidence." The response came faster than he expected. "Stay safe. Don't go inside until police cleared it. I'm coming to San Diego tomorrow. We need to talk." Garrett watched Jade reach his apartment door, saw her hands signal to Diesel, watched them both disappear inside. Seconds stretched. He counted them, 20, 30, 40. Each one amplified his helplessness, his inability to do anything except sit in a vehicle and wait, while his daughter faced whatever threat had violated his home. At 53 seconds, Jade reappeared in the doorway, phone to her ear. He couldn't hear what she was saying, but her body language had shifted from tactical readiness to something else, anger maybe, or disgust. 2 police cruisers pulled into the lot, lights off, moving fast but silent. 4 officers emerged, hands on holstered weapons. Jade met them at the base of the stairs, showed identification, spoke rapidly. 2 officers headed up, while the other 2 approached Garrett's Jeep. The older officer, different from the restaurant, this one maybe late 20s, with a military haircut, knocked on Garrett's window. "Mr. Sullivan, your daughter says you'll want to see this before we start processing." Garrett nodded, began the awkward process of extracting himself from the passenger seat. The officer helped without being asked, respectful but efficient, clearly familiar with disabled veterans. They retrieved Garrett's wheelchair, got him mobile, and he followed them upstairs with dread pooling in his stomach. The apartment had been ransacked. Not randomly, not the chaotic destruction of addicts looking for valuables, but systematically. Every drawer pulled and dumped, every cushion sliced open. His file cabinets emptied across the floor. They'd been looking for something specific, and they'd had time to be thorough. Jade stood in his office, really just the second bedroom, converted to a workspace, staring at the wall above his desk. Someone had spray-painted a message in red, the letters 3 feet tall, "Liars get what liars deserve." Beneath it, taped to the wall, was an envelope. Garrett wheeled closer, saw his name written in block capitals. Jade had already opened it, evidence protocol be damned, and she held out the contents with a hand that wasn't quite steady. A photograph. Garrett sitting in this very apartment, visible through the window taken from outside. The angle suggested someone had been on the fire escape close enough to watch him work, close enough to count the pages he was typing, close enough to see everything. And beneath the photo, a typed note. Withdraw your complaint by Monday or join Beth. We know where Jade sleeps. Accidents happen to Navy SEALs too. Friends of Golden Horizon. The words seemed to pulse in Garrett's vision. Beth. They had written Beth's name, weaponizing his wife's memory, threatening his daughter in the same breath. The casual cruelty of it, the precision of knowing exactly which pressures would hurt most, spoke to an organization that understood fear as a management tool. One of the officers took the photo and note, already talking about evidence bags and forensics. Another was photographing the damage, documenting the violation. But Garrett barely registered their professional competence. His mind was stuck on 3 words, join Beth. Jade crouched beside his wheelchair, her voice low enough that only he could hear. Dad, what happened to Mom? The truth, all of it. He'd known this moment would come, eventually had rehearsed various versions of this conversation during sleepless nights when the past felt more real than the present. But he'd always imagined having more time, better circumstances, a way to frame it that didn't make him sound like a conspiracy theorist or a man broken by grief into seeing patterns that didn't exist. She died in a car accident 7 years ago, brake failure on the 163 during morning commute. Lost control, hit the barrier, died instantly. The official story, the one repeated in police reports and insurance claims, the one he'd told himself until he'd started investigating Golden Horizon and patterns had emerged from chaos. But I'd started asking questions 6 months before she died. Different charity, different fraud, but similar patterns. I'd filed a complaint, done interviews with investigators. And then Beth's brakes failed on a car that had been serviced 2 days earlier, where the mechanic had specifically checked the brake lines. Jade's face went very still. You think someone killed her? I think it's possible. I think... He stopped, forced himself to continue. I think I got too close to something and they sent a message. And I spent 7 years believing it was my fault, that if I just stayed quiet, if I'd been less stubborn about demanding accountability, your mother would still be alive. She took his hand and he felt the calluses that had replaced the softness of the daughter who'd left for the Navy. That's why you kept investigating. Why you went after Golden Horizon alone. You were trying to finish what got her killed. I was trying to make her death mean something. To prove that standing up to corruption wasn't pointless even if it cost everything. One of the officers approached, evidence bag in hand. Mr. Sullivan, we're going to need you to catalog what's missing. Also, you can't stay here tonight. This is an active crime scene and honestly, it's not safe. Jade stood. He's staying with me. Ma'am, if these people know where you live. They don't. Her voice carried absolute certainty. I've been deployed for 4 years. My current residence isn't in any database they can access. And even if they find it, I have a 85-pound Belgian Malinois trained to neutralize threats, and I'm a Navy SEAL who survived worse than some corporate thugs. The officer looked like he wanted to argue, recognized the futility, and settled for making notes. We'll have patrol cars swing by every hour tonight. First sign of anything suspicious, you call 911. They spent the next 90 minutes cataloging the damage. The thieves had taken Garrett's laptop, 2 external hard drives, and every physical file related to his Golden Horizon investigation. But they'd missed the most important thing, the flash drive Garrett kept hidden inside his wheelchair's hollow frame tube, the one containing copies of everything he'd submitted to Inspector General Flynn. By midnight, they were at Jade's apartment, a Spartan 1-bedroom in a complex near Coronado that housed mostly military personnel. She'd set Garrett up on the couch, unfolding it into a bed with clean sheets that smelled like laundry detergent and the faint scent of gun oil. Diesel had claimed the floor beside the couch, positioning himself between Garrett and the door with the dedication of a guardian who took his duties seriously. Jade sat at her small kitchen table, laptop open, typing with the focused intensity of someone on a mission. Garrett watched her work, seeing Beth in the set of her jaw, the way she bit her lower lip when concentrating, the refusal to accept defeat that had defined both the women he loved most. What are you doing? He asked. Research. Preston Whitmore has 7 arrests in 2 years, DUI, assault, drug possession, vandalism, public intoxication, 2 more assaults. Every single charge dismissed. But one stands out. She turned the laptop to show him. November 2021, hit-and-run fatality. Victim was Leonard Hayes, 53-year-old homeless veteran. Witnesses said a Mercedes SUV ran a red light, struck Leonard, fled the scene. Preston Whitmore's Mercedes was found abandoned 3 blocks away, front-end damage, blood on the grille. He was arrested, charged with vehicular manslaughter. Let me guess, charges dropped. Dismissed 6 weeks later, insufficient evidence to prove Preston was driving. But here's the interesting part. She pulled up another document. Leonard Hayes had filed a complaint with the VA 2 months before he died. Complaint about Golden Horizon Veterans Alliance denying his disability housing application despite his qualifying. The connection slammed into Garrett with the force of revelation. They used Preston to kill a whistleblower. Made it look like a drunk driving accident. Maybe Preston really was just drunk and it was a coincidence. But combined with tonight, with the break-in, with the threat mentioning your wife, she closed the laptop. Dad, this isn't just fraud. This is a criminal organization willing to kill to protect itself. And you've put yourself directly in their crosshairs. He knew she was right, had known it probably since the moment he decided to submit his evidence to Inspector General Flynn. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it viscerally were different experiences. His apartment violated his daughter, threatened his wife's death. Reframed from tragic accident to possible murder, the abstract danger had become concrete, immediate, personal. I can't withdraw the complaint, he said quietly. If I do, Beth died for nothing. Leonard Hayes died for nothing. However many other veterans they've hurt or killed, all of it means nothing if I let fear win. Jade came to sit beside him on the couch, bed Diesel's head lifting to track her movement before settling again. I'm not asking you to withdraw. I'm asking you to let me help. Really help. Not just react when Preston Whitmore spits on you, but proactively investigate, protect you, build a case so strong they can't threaten their way out of it. You're on leave. You should be resting, recovering, spending time with family, which includes protecting my father from people who murdered my mother. Her voice broke slightly on the last word, the first crack in her control since the restaurant. I didn't know. For 7 years, I thought it was an accident. I thought it was just bad luck, mechanical failure, one of those things that happens. But if they killed her, if they took her from us because you were asking questions. She stopped, gathered herself. Then I need to see this through as much as you do. Garrett pulled her into a hug, feeling her shake with suppressed emotion. Grief and rage and determination all warring for dominance. They stayed like that for a long moment, father and daughter united in loss and purpose, while Diesel watched over them with the patient vigilance of a protector who understood his job had just expanded to guarding 2 Sullivans instead of 1. When they finally pulled apart, Jade wiped her eyes and stood, professional mask reassembling. Okay, tomorrow we start fighting back. Tonight we sleep. Diesel's on watch. I'm a light sleeper with a gun in my nightstand, and anyone who tries to come through that door is going to deeply regret it. Garrett settled back into the makeshift bed, exhaustion finally catching up to the adrenaline crash. But sleep felt distant, his mind replaying the evening's events. Preston's spit, Jade's violence, the ransacked apartment, the threat against his daughter. Somewhere in San Diego, powerful people were discussing him making decisions about how to neutralize the problem he represented. And he'd just dragged his daughter into the crossfire. His phone buzzed one final time. Another unknown number, another text. You should have stayed quiet, Mr. Sullivan. Now you've made it personal. Now it gets worse. He showed it to Jade. She screenshotted it, added it to a folder labeled evidence, and then blocked the number. Let them threaten. Every text, every action, every mistake they make is ammunition. They're scared, Dad. Scared people make errors. And when they do, we'll be there to capitalize. She kissed his forehead, a gesture from childhood reversed now, the daughter comforting the father, and headed to her bedroom. Diesel remained at his post, eyes reflecting the ambient light from street lamps outside, patient and alert. Garrett stared at the ceiling, thinking about Beth, about Jade, about the 847 pages sitting in Inspector General Flynn's office, and the flash drive hidden in his wheelchair frame. Tomorrow, Flynn was coming to San Diego. Tomorrow, they'd start building a case that couldn't be threatened or intimidated into silence. Tomorrow, the fight would begin in earnest. But tonight, for the first time in 9 months, he wasn't alone. His daughter was home. And together, they were going to finish what Beth's death had started, justice or something close enough to honor her memory. Outside San Diego went about its Friday night business, unaware that in a small apartment near Coronado, a disabled veteran and his Navy SEAL daughter were planning a war against corruption that wore suits and hid behind charity. The fight ahead would be brutal, dangerous, possibly fatal. But Sullivan's didn't quit. Not when it mattered. Not when it was right. And this was the most right thing Garrett had done since the day he'd married Beth and promised to build a life worth living. Morning arrived through Jade's apartment windows like an interrogation light. Harsh, uncompromising, demanding answers Garrett wasn't ready to provide. He woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Jade's voice speaking in clipped phrases that suggested she was on the phone with someone who outranked her. Diesel sat beside the couch, watching him with amber eyes that conveyed both concern and judgment, as if the dog understood Garrett had brought danger into his handler's life and was still deciding whether to approve. Jade ended the call, walked into the living room carrying 2 mugs. She'd already been up for hours, her hair wet from a shower, dressed in running clothes that showed she'd completed her morning workout, while Garrett slept through his alarm and his responsibilities. She handed him coffee without comment, then sat in the chair across from him with the posture of someone about to deliver news that wouldn't improve his day. Inspector General Flynn's flight lands at 10. He wants to meet somewhere public, somewhere we can talk without being overheard. I suggested the pier near the USS Midway Museum. Tourists provide cover, open sightlines, make surveillance obvious. Garrett tested the coffee black, strong enough to strip paint. He say why he's come in person. He could have called. Someone ransacked your apartment 12 hours after you submitted evidence to his office. That suggests either his investigation is compromised or his agency is, or both. Either way, electronic communication is risky. She pulled out her laptop, opened it to reveal multiple windows of data that looked like financial spreadsheets interbred with surveillance footage. I spent the night digging into Preston Whitmore. His social media is a masterclass in entitled stupidity, but buried in all the yacht parties and bottle service. There's a pattern. She turned the screen toward him. Screenshots of Instagram posts tagged locations. Timestamps. Every 2 weeks, Preston posts from the same Beverly Hills address, always at night, always deleted by morning. Property records show it's owned by a shell company called Meridian Holdings, LLC. And Meridian Holdings is one of the companies you flagged in your Golden Horizon investigation. Garrett leaned forward, his accountant's instincts activating. Meridian received $4.2 million in consulting fees from Golden Horizon over 3 years. Services rendered strategic advisory and stakeholder engagement, which is corporate speak for nothing. Right. But if Preston's visiting a Meridian property every 2 weeks and Meridian is paying Golden Horizon's executive director, she pulled up another document, this one showing wire transfers between accounts. Victor Blackwell, then Preston, isn't just Senator Whitmore's spoiled son. He's involved, actively involved. The implications crystallized with unpleasant clarity. Last night's attack wasn't random drunk behavior. It was calculated intimidation. Preston recognizing Garrett's name because he'd been briefed by people who understood Garrett represented a threat to their operation, which meant everyone at that restaurant table had witnessed a confrontation orchestrated by criminals who'd successfully hidden behind charitable giving for 16 years. His phone vibrated. Text from Flynn. Change of plans. Someone's following me from airport. Meet at 1600 block of Pacific Highway construction site, 45 minutes. Come alone. Jade read over his shoulder. He's spooked. Can you track who's following him? She was already typing, her fingers moving across the keyboard with unconscious speed. Pulling traffic camera footage near the airport. If they're good, they'll use a rental or stolen vehicle. If they're sloppy, she stopped, enlarged a frame showing a black Escalade with tinted windows maintaining 3 car lengths behind a silver sedan. They drive cars that scream federal contractor. Can you identify the plates? Already running them. Registered to a LLC that's registered to another LLC, but the payment chain leads back to... She went silent, her face draining color. Dad, this vehicle is registered to a company that received payments from Golden Horizon last year. $1.3 million for security consulting. The words settled like stones in Garrett's chest. Golden Horizon had hired contractors to follow the Inspector General's lead investigator, which meant they knew Flynn was coming to San Diego, knew he was meeting with Garrett, and were monitoring the situation in real time. The investigation wasn't just compromised, and it was being actively surveilled by the people they were investigating. We need to warn Flynn. Jade shook her head. He knows. That's why he changed the meeting location to a construction site. Hard to hide surveillance in an active work zone, lots of exits, civilian workers as witnesses. It's actually smart. It's also dangerous. If they're willing to follow a federal agent, then they're desperate, which means your evidence is more damaging than you thought. She stood moving to her bedroom and returning with a handgun different from the one she'd carried last night, this one larger, more aggressive. She checked the magazine, chambered around, tucked it into a holster at the small of her back. I'm going with you. Flynn said, come alone. Flynn's being followed by private contractors hired by the people who probably killed Mom. You're going in a wheelchair to a construction site with limited mobility and zero combat training. I'm going, and we're taking diesel, and if you argue, I'm going to tie you to that chair and drive you there anyway. The absolute certainty in her voice reminded Garrett of Beth. The same refusal to compromise when she believed she was right, the same willingness to override objections with superior force. He'd loved that quality in his wife, had learned to recognize when resistance was futile and acceptance was wisdom. Fine, but we take precautions. Different route than expected. Check for tails, establish fallback positions. She smiled, brief but genuine. Now you're thinking tactically. They left 20 minutes later in Jade's Jeep Diesel in the back, maintaining his perpetual state of controlled readiness. Jade drove with the same methodical attention she'd shown last night, checking mirrors, varying speed, taking sudden turns that would expose anyone following. Garrett watched the city pass familiar streets, transformed by the knowledge that somewhere in this sprawl of highways and shopping centers, people were making plans to silence him permanently. The construction site occupied a full city block, steel skeleton, of what would eventually become luxury condos, currently just framework and optimism. Concrete trucks idled at the perimeter, workers in hard hats moved materials, and the constant percussion of nail guns provided audio cover for conversations that required privacy. Flynn's sedan sat near the portable offices, the inspector general himself standing beside it with the careful posture of someone expecting trouble. Jade parked 30 yards away, angled for quick exit. Stay in the vehicle until I clear the area. She stepped out with Diesel, both of them moving through the construction site like they were sweeping for IEDs in Kandahar, rather than meeting a federal investigator in San Diego. Garrett watched her communicate with Flynn, hand signals more than words, a shared language of operational security that suggested Flynn had military background beyond his bureaucratic title. After 2 minutes of surveying sightlines and identifying potential threats, Jade signaled Garrett forward. He rolled his wheelchair across packed dirt, dodging rebar and lumber, until he reached the makeshift meeting point, a plywood platform that provided stable ground and minimal cover. Flynn looked worse than his official photo suggested. Mid-50s gray creeping through his hair, lines around his eyes that spoke to too many late nights, reading documents that destroyed his faith in institutions. He extended a hand, shook Garrett's with the firm grip of someone who'd survived worse meetings than this. Mr. Sullivan, sorry for the dramatic relocation. Picked up surveillance, leaving the airport, professional tail, multiple vehicles rotating positions. They know I'm here. My daughter identified the vehicle. Registered to a contractor paid by Golden Horizon. Flynn's jaw tightened. Then we have confirmation. Your complaint triggered exactly the response I feared. He pulled a manila folder from his jacket, handed it to Garrett. I need you to look at this. Tell me if any names are familiar. Garrett opened the folder. Inside photographs, surveillance quality, long lens, grainy, but identifiable. Victor Blackwell shaking hands with a man Garrett didn't recognize. The same man meeting with Senator Whitmore outside a restaurant. A third photo showing the mystery man entering a building with a sign, Department of Veterans Affairs. Who is he? Deputy Director Thomas Reeves, second in command at the VA, oversight responsibility for all veteran charity vetting. The man who approved Golden Horizon's initial application for grant eligibility 16 years ago and every renewal since. Flynn's expression held the particular disgust reserved for betrayal from within. I've been investigating Golden Horizon for 8 months since before you submitted your complaint. Your evidence confirmed what I already suspected. This isn't fraud, it's institutional capture. They've bought people inside the VA, inside congressional oversight, possibly inside my own agency. Jade moved closer, eyes never stopping their scan of the construction site. How deep does it go? 3 senators on the Veterans Affairs Committee, 5 congressional representatives, 2 deputy VA directors, and at least 6 inspector general field agents who've mysteriously failed to identify obvious red flags in Golden Horizon's reporting. Flynn pulled out another document organizational chart showing Golden Horizon's board and advisory council. 23 names total. We're talking about a corruption network that's stolen over $400 million and successfully neutralized every investigation for 16 years. Garrett felt the weight of those numbers, the sheer scale of institutional failure required to enable fraud this systematic. If you've known for 8 months, why hasn't anyone been arrested? Because everyone I've tried to coordinate with either stalls the investigation or leaks details to Golden Horizon. I submit warrant requests, they get denied for insufficient evidence. I try to freeze accounts, paperwork disappears. I attempt to interview board members, they lawyer up before I can schedule meetings. Frustration bled through Flynn's professional composure. Your complaint was the first external corroboration I've received. Independent analysis, detailed financial forensics evidence compiled by someone they couldn't threaten or buy. That's why I submitted it directly to the Deputy Attorney General, bypassing the normal channels. And that's why they escalated, Jade said, ransacking Dad's apartment, threatening me, having Preston Whitmore assault him publicly. They're trying to discredit him before the evidence reaches someone who can act on it. Flynn nodded. Which is why I'm here. To tell you face to face that your life is in immediate danger and to offer you a choice. He looked directly at Garrett, the weight of authority behind his words. Withdraw your complaint, disappear into protective custody for 6 months while I try to build a parallel case using your evidence as foundation. Or stay testify at the congressional hearing scheduled for next Friday and become the public face of this investigation, knowing that Golden Horizon will use every resource to destroy your credibility and possibly end your life. The choice wasn't really a choice. Garrett had understood at the moment he decided to submit his evidence. Running meant abandoning best memory, validating the fear that had kept other victims silent, allowing corruption to continue, because fighting it required more courage than he possessed. Staying meant risking everything, but it also meant standing for something larger than his own survival. Before he could answer, Diesel's low growl cut through the construction noise. The dog had gone rigid, focused on the eastern perimeter of the site where a white cargo van had pulled up, engine running, but no workers emerging. Jade's hand moved to the weapon at her back. Flynn, how many vehicles were in your tail? 3 that I counted, black Escalade, gray Suburban, and white cargo van. Jade was already moving, positioning herself between Garrett and the van, her body language shifting from alert to combat ready. Dad, get back to the Jeep, now. The van's rear doors burst open. 6 men emerged dressed in construction worker clothes, but moving with the coordinated precision of tactical operators. They spread out, attempting to look casual, but their formation betrayed training, establishing crossfire positions, cutting off exit routes, boxing in the plywood platform, where Garrett, Jade, and Flynn stood exposed. Flynn pulled his service weapon, a Glock that looked small and inadequate against 6 armed contractors. Federal agent, identify yourselves. None of them responded. They continued advancing, hands moving inside jackets toward weapons not yet visible but clearly present. Construction workers nearby began noticing some retreating toward vehicles, others pulling phones to record whatever was about to happen. Garrett's wheelchair felt like an anchor, rendering him immobile while violence approached with methodical certainty. Jade stood in front of him, Diesel at her side, vibrating with controlled aggression, both of them ready to fight, but outnumbered 3-1. The lead contractor, tall maybe 40 with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, stopped 10 yards away. Mr. Sullivan, you need to come with us. Nobody needs to get hurt. Jade's voice came out flat, empty of inflection. Approach any closer, and I put 3 rounds in your center mass before your friends can draw. You're one SEAL with a handgun. We're 6 contractors with body armor and automatic weapons in the van. Math isn't in your favor. Math assumes I care about surviving. I don't. I care about protecting my father. Which means I'm willing to trade my life for yours, and you're not willing to die for a paycheck. Different motivations produce different outcomes. The contractor's confidence flickered, not fear exactly, but recalculation. Jade had shifted the dynamic from tactical assessment to willingness to embrace mutual destruction, and that changed equations in ways training manuals couldn't address. Flynn stepped forward, badge visible. This is a federal investigation. You're interfering with official business. Stand down or face felony charges. Your investigation's been shut down, Flynn. Check your email. You've been reassigned to the Anchorage field office effective immediately. Someone else is handling Golden Horizon now. Flynn pulled his phone, checked, and Garrett saw his face go pale. That's impossible. I didn't receive any reassignment orders. He stopped reading the screen. This was sent 20 minutes ago from the Deputy IG's office, because that's how long it took after your flight landed for word to reach people who matter. You're done, Flynn. Walk away, or we make you walk away. Jade's hand tightened on her weapon. Dad, Jeep, now. Garrett started rolling backward, but his wheelchair's wheels caught on uneven ground, tipping the chair sideways. He grabbed the armrest, tried to balance, felt gravity winning. Then Jade was there, one hand steadying the chair while keeping her weapon trained on the contractors, demonstrating the kind of multitasking that came from years of operating in environments where failure meant death. Diesel guard. The dog moved to position himself directly in the contractor's path, teeth visible, a low rumble building in his chest that promised violence if they advanced. The lead contractor pulled a taser from his jacket, not lethal but effective against animals trained to attack. Last chance, Sullivan. Come voluntarily or we extract you involuntarily. Your choice determines how much your daughter suffers. The threat hung in air, thick with diesel exhaust and tension. Garrett saw the calculation in Jade's eyes, the same assessment he'd watched her make last night. How many could she neutralize before they overwhelmed her? What price would she pay to protect him? How far would she go to honor her promise that they'd face this together? He made the decision before she could. I'll go with you, just don't hurt my daughter. Dad, no. Jade, stand down. He met her eyes, trying to communicate everything he couldn't say with armed contractors watching. Trust me, I have a plan. Don't throw your life away for mine. These men aren't going to hurt me. They need me alive to withdraw my complaint, which means I have leverage. The lead contractor smiled. Smart man, smarter than his federal friend here. He gestured to two of his team. Bring Sullivan. Carefully, boss wants him undamaged. They approached Garrett's wheelchair with professional competence, beginning to unfasten the brake. Jade looked like she was calculating angles for a suicide charge, and Garrett knew he had seconds before she did something brave and fatal. Then Flynn's phone rang. The inspector general answered, listened, and his expression transformed from defeat to something harder. Understood. Yes, sir. Immediately. He ended the call, looked at the lead contractor with renewed authority. Release Mr. Sullivan. You've got about 90 seconds before FBI tactical teams arrive to arrest you for kidnapping a federal witness. The contractor laughed. Federal witness to what? Your investigation just got shut down. Not my investigation. Deputy Attorney General's investigation. Turns out when you submit evidence of corruption involving sitting senators, it goes straight to DOJ. And when contractors hired by the target of that investigation attempt to kidnap the primary witness in broad daylight. He checked his watch. You trigger automatic federal response protocols that I don't have authority to stop even if I wanted to. Sirens rose in the distance, multiple vehicles approaching fast. The contractors exchanged glances, their formation breaking as individual survival instincts overrode team cohesion. The lead contractor stepped back from Garrett's wheelchair, hands raised in a gesture that wouldn't save him but might reduce his sentence. This isn't over, Sullivan. You just made it personal. It's been personal since you murdered my wife 7 years ago. Now it's just mutual. The words came out before Garrett could stop them, raw and honest and probably stupid. But they hit the contractor like a physical blow. Not guilt, but recognition that he was facing someone who'd accepted loss and transformed it into purpose. Dangerous people weren't the ones with nothing to lose. Dangerous people were the ones who'd already lost everything and decided making the other side pay was worth whatever came next. 3 FBI SUVs crashed through the construction site, perimeter agents spilling out with weapons drawn, and tactical vests identifying them as hostage rescue team. The contractors didn't resist smart enough to know that fighting federal agents carried life sentences, while kidnapping charges might be negotiated down with expensive lawyers and political connections. Within minutes, all 6 men were zip-tied and being loaded into vehicles. The FBI's lead agent, a woman in her late 30s with the bearing of someone who'd spent time in military special operations before transitioning to federal law enforcement, approached Garrett with an evidence bag. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm Special Agent Rebecca Thornton. Deputy Attorney General Harrigan sent me to establish protective detail for you and your family. We need to relocate you to a secure facility while we process the kidnapping attempt and prepare your testimony for next Friday's hearing." Jade stepped forward, defined secure facility. Federal Safe House rotating security teams communication protocols designed to prevent leaks. Standard witness protection procedures for high-value testimony in corruption cases. Thornton looked at Jade with the recognition of one operator assessing another. "You military Lieutenant Navy SEALs, currently on leave. Then you understand operational security. Your father's safety requires isolation from normal patterns, limited external contact, controlled information flow. We'll accommodate your presence as family, but the dog stays behind." Diesel growled low and continuous. Jade's expression hardened. "Diesel's a military working dog with combat deployment experience. He's better security than half your team, and he goes where I go. Non-negotiable." Thornton's jaw tightened. Authority challenged by someone who outranked her in the complicated hierarchy of federal law enforcement versus military special operations. "I'll need to clear it with, 'Clear it. We'll wait.'" Jade crossed her arms, body language broadcasting that movement to any safe house would happen on her terms, or not at all. Flynn intervened, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd survived bureaucratic warfare longer than either woman. "Agent Thornton, the dog stays. Lieutenant Sullivan's right, a trained K-9 provides threat detection capabilities your team can't match. And given that Golden Horizon just attempted kidnapping in broad daylight, we need every advantage available." Thornton accepted the override with professional grace, making notes on a tablet. "Understood. We transport in 20 minutes. Mr. Sullivan, pack for a week. Bring nothing electronic, phones, laptops, tablets, all stay behind. We'll provide secure devices at the safe house." Garrett's chest tightened. A week isolated, unable to work, dependent on federal protection from people who'd already demonstrated their ability to corrupt federal agencies. "I have clients, accounting work that needs completion, bills that will be handled. We'll notify your clients you're unavailable due to medical emergency, extend deadlines, coordinate with your bank to ensure automatic payments continue." With Thornton's efficiency suggested she'd done this before relocating witnesses whose lives couldn't simply pause for justice. "Your job right now is staying alive long enough to testify. Everything else is secondary." The next 3 hours became a blur of logistical choreography, returning to Jade's apartment under FBI escort, packing minimal belongings, coordinating with Garrett's landlord about his ransacked apartment, transferring files to Flynn under chain of custody protocols that would make them admissible as evidence. Through it all, Garrett felt his autonomy dissolving, his life becoming something managed by federal agents and lawyers, and people who meant well but couldn't understand what it felt like to have your home violated, your daughter threatened, and your wife's death reframed as murder rather than misfortune. Jade packed with military efficiency, organizing their belongings into categories that suggested she'd evacuated under fire before and knew the difference between essential and expendable. Diesel shadowed her, his anxiety visible in the way his ears flattened whenever anyone approached Garrett too quickly. Flynn pulled Garrett aside while FBI agents swept the apartment for surveillance devices. "I want you to understand what you're walking into. Golden Horizon has spent 16 years building relationships, accumulating favors, creating dependencies that make their survival important to powerful people. Your testimony threatens all of that. They'll attack your credibility, dig up every mistake you've ever made, frame your investigation as the obsession of a grieving widower looking for someone to blame. Let them. My evidence speaks for itself. Evidence requires interpretation, and interpretation depends on trust. They'll paint you as unreliable, disabled veteran with possible PTSD man who couldn't protect his wife, father, estranged from his daughter for 4 years while she served overseas. Every human vulnerability becomes a weapon in their hands." Flynn's expression softened. "I'm not saying don't testify. I'm saying prepare yourself for character assassination conducted by people who've successfully destroyed better men than us." The warning landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Garrett had spent 9 months focused on building airtight financial documentation, tracing money through shell companies and offshore accounts, creating a paper trail that proved fraud beyond reasonable doubt. But he'd neglected to consider that proving Golden Horizon guilty required first proving himself credible, and credibility was subjective in ways that bank transfers weren't. Jade emerged from her bedroom carrying a tactical bag that probably violated several federal regulations regarding civilian possession of military equipment. Agent Thornton noticed but chose pragmatism over protocol enforcement. Having a Navy SEAL's resources available outweighed concerns about jurisdictional purity. They left in a convoy, two FBI SUVs bracketing Jade's Jeep, a surveillance drone overhead that Thornton claimed was standard procedure but felt like overkill. The safe house location remained classified until they were en route, a security measure designed to prevent leaks, but which also reinforced Garrett's growing sense of helplessness. His life had become something that happened to him rather than something he controlled. Decisions made by federal agents, following protocols written by people who'd never sat in a wheelchair facing armed contractors. The safe house occupied a converted ranch property 30 miles east of San Diego, surrounded by scrubland that provided clear sight lines and made approach difficult. Solar panels on the roof suggested self-sufficiency, and the reinforced windows indicated someone had thought seriously about withstanding assault. FBI agents occupied the guest house, maintaining perimeter security while giving Garrett and Jade privacy in the main residence. Thornton conducted the intake briefing with bureaucratic thoroughness, communication protocols, emergency procedures, meal schedules, testimony, preparation, timeline. Garrett absorbed information with the part of his brain trained to process details, while the rest of him wondered how his life had collapsed from quiet accounting practice to federal witness protection in less than 48 hours. That night, after the FBI agents had retreated to their quarters and the property settled into the watchful silence of controlled security, Garrett sat on the safe house deck watching stars emerge against desert darkness. Diesel lay at his feet, finally relaxing now that the day's chaos had resolved into stationary vigilance. Jade joined him carrying two beers she'd found in the safe house refrigerator, domestic labels, suggesting someone's attempt at hospitality through familiar brands. She handed him a bottle, sat in the adjacent chair. For long minutes they drank in silence, letting the night's coolness wash away the accumulated tension of federal protection and existential threat. Finally, Jade spoke. "Mom's death. Tell me everything you remember. Not the official version, your version." Garrett took a long pull from his beer, organizing memories he'd spent 7 years trying to compartmentalize. We'd been fighting, not big fights, just the accumulated friction of living with someone who's frustrated by their limitations and taking it out on the person closest to them. I was angry about being disabled, angry about needing help, angry about watching other veterans struggle while charities claimed to help but delivered nothing. He paused, the honesty harder than expected. Beth told me to let it go, said investigating fraud wouldn't bring my legs back, wouldn't change anything except maybe getting me hurt. We argued the night before she died. I told her she didn't understand what it meant to watch brothers in arms get abandoned by the same country they'd served. She said I didn't understand what it meant to watch my husband destroy himself, chasing justice that would never feel like enough. Jade's hand found his in the darkness. What happened the next morning? She left for work early, wanted to avoid continuing the argument, or maybe she was just tired of living with someone who'd chosen bitterness over healing. I was supposed to have a meeting with a VA investigator about my complaint against another charity, different organization, similar fraud. Beth knew about the meeting, had asked me not to go. His voice broke slightly. We never said goodbye. She left angry, I was angry, and 3 hours later, California Highway Patrol called to tell me she was dead. Brake failure on the 163 during morning commute. Her car had been serviced 2 days earlier at the dealership we'd used for years. Mechanics specifically checked brake lines because she'd mentioned hearing a noise. Everything tested fine, no issues, full inspection report documented. Then 48 hours later, total brake failure on a highway during peak traffic. Garrett stared into darkness, seeing the accident reconstructed from police reports and witness statements. She hit the center barrier at 60 miles per hour, died on impact. ME ruled it mechanical failure, brake line corrosion, bad luck. Jade was quiet, processing. But you started suspecting different after you investigated Golden Horizon. After I found the pattern. 8 other deaths connected to veterans who'd filed complaints against Golden Horizon or affiliated charities. Car accidents, suicides, medical emergencies, all ruled accidental or natural, all occurring within 6 months of their complaints becoming active investigations. The statistical probability of that many coincidental deaths among whistleblowers is effectively zero. But you can't prove Mom was murdered. No concrete evidence, no payment records, no witnesses, nothing that would survive legal scrutiny. Just probability and pattern recognition and the certainty that comes from spending 9 months documenting how these people operate. He finished his beer, the bottle empty, but his hands needing something to hold. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she really did die from mechanical failure. Maybe I'm a grieving widower creating conspiracy theories because accepting random tragedy is harder than believing evil can be fought and defeated. Jade squeezed his hand. Or maybe you're right, and these people murdered Mom because you threatened their operation and now they're trying to do the same to us. She stood and moved to lean against the deck, railing her silhouette sharp against starlight. Tomorrow I'm going to Los Angeles. That Beverly Hills address where Preston posts every 2 weeks, I'm going to surveil it, identify who comes and goes, build a target package. Jade, that's not your job. You're on leave. Let the FBI. The FBI just got Flynn reassigned to Alaska and missed 6 contractors preparing to kidnap you in broad daylight. I love Agent Thornton's confidence, but federal bureaucracy moves at federal speed, and we've got 6 days before your testimony. 6 days for Golden Horizon to discredit you, threaten witnesses, or arrange an accident that makes your evidence inadmissible. Her voice hardened with resolve. I'm not sitting in a safe house waiting for them to act. I'm gathering intelligence that gives us leverage when they try. Garrett wanted to argue to insist she prioritize safety over action, but the hypocrisy was obvious. He'd spent 9 months pursuing Golden Horizon, knowing the risks, refusing to stop despite threats and danger. Asking Jade to behave more cautiously than he'd behaved himself was parental concern masquerading as wisdom. If you're going to surveil the property, you need support. Someone watching your back while you watch theirs. She smiled, visible even in darkness. Diesel's trained for exactly that, and I have SEAL teammates who owe me favors off-duty, unofficial, plausibly deniable if things go wrong. This isn't my first unauthorized intelligence gathering operation. The casual admission that his daughter regularly operated outside official channels should have alarmed him. Instead, it provided strange comfort evidence that Jade had inherited Beth's willingness to break rules when rules protected the wrong people. His phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket, then remembered Agent Thornton's instructions about electronic security. Supposed to leave this off, unless someone's trying to contact you about something urgent enough to risk compromised communication. Jade took the phone, checked the screen. Unknown number, text message. She read aloud, Mr. Sullivan, my name is Dr. Rebecca Thornton. Not the FBI agent, different person. I work as senior forensic accountant for Golden Horizon. I have evidence that corroborates everything in your complaint, plus documentation of 14 contract killings, including your wife's murder. I want to help, but I have a 5-year-old son, and these people know where I live. Please call this number from a secure line. Time sensitive. Lives depend on this. The message sat between them like a live grenade, potential salvation, or elaborate trap impossible to determine without risking exposure. Garrett's investigative instincts screamed opportunity. His survival instincts screamed setup. And his father's heart screamed that someone with a 5-year-old son was being leveraged the same way he was being leveraged through Jade. Could be legitimate, Jade said carefully. Insider wanting to jump ship before everything collapses. Or could be Golden Horizon trying to identify our communication methods, mapping our network before the hearing. Only one way to find out. Garrett took the phone back. Agent Thornton, the FBI one, has secure communication equipment. Tomorrow I'll ask her to establish contact vet. This person determine credibility before we commit to anything. Jade nodded agreement, but her expression suggested she was already planning contingencies for both scenarios. They went inside Diesel, following with the patient dedication of a guardian who understood his watch continued, regardless of circadian preference. Garrett lay in bed that night, a strange bed, in a safe house owned by federal agencies, protected by armed agents, from people who'd already proven their willingness to kill, and thought about choices that had seemed clear 9 months ago becoming complicated by consequence and cost. He'd wanted justice for Beth, accountability for stolen money validation, that standing up to corruption mattered even when corruption fought back. But he hadn't wanted Jade involved, hadn't wanted 5-year-old sons caught in crossfire between whistleblowers and criminals, hadn't wanted his pursuit of righteousness to create exactly the kind of collateral damage he'd spent years condemning when governments and charities produced it. Sleep came late and brought dreams of Beth driving on a highway, where brake pedals did nothing. Her face calm because she didn't know yet that mechanical failure would arrive in 60 seconds, that her husband's investigation would cost her life, that justice delayed would be justice denied until their daughter came home and chose combat over safety. He woke at dawn to the sound of Jade already running perimeter circuits with Diesel, both of them maintaining fitness and readiness, because warriors understood that readiness was the only luxury available when survival became professional responsibility rather than assumed outcome. Agent Rebecca Thornton, the FBI. One, not the mysterious accountant, established secure contact protocols at sunrise using encryption technology that looked borrowed from intelligence agencies that didn't officially exist. She set up the call on a laptop hardened against surveillance, routing it through servers in locations she wouldn't specify, while Garrett sat across from her, wondering when his life had become something requiring CIA-level operational security. The line connected. A woman's voice emerged, shaky but controlled. "Mr. Sullivan, this is Dr. Rachel Brennan, Senior Forensic Accountant at Golden Horizon. I need you to understand, I'm risking my son's life making this call." Garrett glanced at FBI Thornton, who nodded permission to engage. "Dr. Brennan, how do I know you're legitimate and not Golden Horizon trying to map my network?" "You don't. But I can prove I'm who I claim by telling you something only someone with access to Golden Horizon's internal servers would know." She took a breath. "Your wife Beth didn't die from brake failure. She died from antifreeze poisoned into her diabetic insulin supply over 3 weeks. Medical examiner was paid $150,000 to rule it diabetic coma rather than poisoning. The payment came from Senator Whitmore's offshore account, processed through a shell company called Meridian Holdings." The room tilted. Garrett gripped the table edge, his knuckles bone white against cheap laminate. Jade, standing behind FBI Thornton, went rigid, her entire posture shifting from observer to threat assessment in the space between heartbeats. "How do you know this?" "Because I processed the payment. I've been documenting their crimes for 20 months, building evidence, waiting for someone brave enough or stupid enough to challenge them publicly. When I saw your complaint filed with Inspector General Flynn, I knew you were both." Her voice cracked slightly. "They killed your wife, Mr. Sullivan. They've killed 13 others. And they'll kill my son if they discover I'm talking to you. So I need your promise that whatever happens next, someone protects Owen." FBI Thornton leaned forward. "Dr. Brennan, this is Special Agent Rebecca Thornton, FBI. If you have evidence of multiple homicides, we can offer witness protection, relocate you and your son, provide..." "They have people inside the FBI, inside the VA, inside the Inspector General's office. Witness protection means entering a system they've already compromised." She paused, the sound of a door closing audible in the background. "I have a better plan. I've created a dead man's switch automated evidence upload to every major news outlet, the Deputy Attorney General, and 3 congressional oversight committees. It triggers automatically if I don't check in every 12 hours. Right now, Golden Horizon doesn't know I'm the leak. They suspect several people, but no confirmation. That uncertainty keeps Owen and me alive." Garrett found his voice, though it emerged rougher than intended. "What do you need from me?" "Testify." Friday's hearing, Congressional Record Live Television. Force Golden Horizon into the public eye, where killing witnesses becomes impossible without proving everything we're saying. Then my evidence uploads simultaneously $3.1 billion in documented fraud, 14 contract killings with payment records names of every compromised official. Her determination cut through the fear. They survive in shadows. We drag them into light and their whole operation collapses. If they suspect you're helping me, then I've already made my choice. My son doesn't grow up in a world where organizations like Golden Horizon operate with impunity, where people like your wife die because they're married to someone inconvenient." The conviction in her voice reminded Garrett of Beth, of Jade, of every woman he'd ever known who decided that fear was less important than what you did despite it. "I'm sending you files now. Bank transfers showing Senator Whitmore ordered your wife's murder. Payment records for the contractors who poisoned her. Everything you need to make this personal, not just financial." The laptop screen filled with documents, spreadsheets showing wire transfers, emails discussing removing obstacles, payment authorizations signed by Frederick Whitmore himself. Garrett read his wife's name reduced to line items and budget allocations, her death treated as operational expense, rather than human tragedy. Jade's hand found his shoulder, grounding him before rage could overwhelm strategy. FBI Thornton was already copying files, creating redundant backups, building the evidence chain that survived challenges from expensive lawyers. Dr. Brennan continued urgency, replacing fear. There's something else. Golden Horizon knows about Friday's hearing. They're planning a coordinated response character assassination campaign, planted stories about your mental health, fabricated evidence that your investigation is revenge fantasy from a grieving widower. Senator Whitmore's scheduled a press conference for Thursday, 24 hours before you testify, where he'll preemptively discredit you. Let him. Garrett's voice came out harder than he'd heard it in years. Let him stand in front of cameras and call me crazy. Because when I testify Friday with bank records showing he murdered my wife, his press conference becomes evidence of consciousness of guilt. FBI Thornton interjected. Dr. Brennan, we need a way to contact you securely. Dead man's switch is good insurance, but we need real-time coordination for... No, every communication is risk. My son is at a private school. Golden Horizon's CFO's daughter also attends. They're watching for changes in my behavior, monitoring my contacts, waiting for me to make mistakes. She paused, and Garrett heard the sound of a child laughing in the background, innocent and oblivious to the danger surrounding him. I'm uploading everything to your secure server now. After this call, we don't communicate again until after Mr. Sullivan testifies. If something goes wrong, if they take my son, if the dead man's switch triggers early, you'll know, because evidence will flood every newsroom in America. The call ended. The laptop displayed a progress bar as gigabytes of data transferred from Dr. Brennan's server to FBI custody, years of documentation, the accumulated evidence of systematic corruption transformed into weapons that might destroy the organization she'd worked for or might get her killed before justice could materialize. FBI Thornton closed the laptop. She's either the bravest person I've encountered or she's walking into a trap she doesn't recognize. Either way, we treat her intel as credible until proven otherwise. Jade had moved to the window, watching the perimeter with Diesel beside her. They'll figure out she's the leak. Too much specific information, too much access to internal files. Golden Horizon will run counterintelligence, narrow suspects, and when they identify her... She didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood the implication. Garrett stared at the files filling the laptop screen, each document representing a choice Dr. Brennan had made to prioritize justice over safety. She'd spent 20 months building a case while watching her son grow up, surrounded by people who'd kill both of them if they discovered her betrayal. We need to move the hearing up, he said. Every day we wait is another day they can identify Dr. Brennan, another day they can plan countermeasures. FBI Thornton shook her head. Congressional hearings require coordination between multiple committees, scheduling conflicts with other testimony media arrangements. Friday is already accelerated timeline. Anything faster requires executive intervention we don't have authority to request. Then we create pressure that makes intervention necessary. Jade turned from the window, her expression carrying the tactical certainty of someone who'd spent years turning impossible situations into mission success. Dad's complaint is already public record. Flynn submitted it to Deputy Attorney General. We leak the juiciest parts to media, now create feeding frenzy that forces Congress to respond immediately rather than waiting for scheduled hearing. That violates witness protection protocols, FBI Thornton said, but her tone suggested she was calculating feasibility rather than rejecting outright. And it exposes Mr. Sullivan to Golden Horizon's full attention before we're ready to protect him during testimony. They already know where he is. Attempted kidnapping yesterday proves they're tracking him in real time despite federal protection. While now Jade pulled out her phone, the secure device FBI had provided supposedly immune to surveillance. I have contacts at 3 major networks who owe me favors from when I provided background on operations I can't discuss. One call in your father's story becomes national news by tonight. Garrett wanted to object, to insist they follow proper procedures and trust institutional safeguards. But institutions had failed repeatedly. Inspector General compromise v. a corrupted congressional oversight captured by the people they were supposed to oversee. Make the calls. FBI Thornton didn't argue, which told Garrett she'd already reached similar conclusions about institutional reliability. I'll coordinate with Deputy Attorney General Harrigan, give him advance warning that media storm is incoming. Better he hears it from us than CNN. The next 6 hours became controlled chaos. Jade conducting interviews via secure video with journalists who understood that Navy SEAL testimonials carried credibility. Most sources couldn't match FBI. Thornton coordinating with Justice Department lawyers who scrambled to adjust strategies for accelerated timeline. And Garrett reviewing his own evidence with fresh eyes sharpened by Dr. Brennan's files. By evening, the story had metastasized across news networks, with the viral intensity that came from perfect storms of scandal emotion and documented proof. Disabled veteran exposes billion-dollar fraud. Senator implicated in wife's murder. Whistleblowers risk everything for justice. Garrett's phone, still supposedly secure, buzzed constantly with interview requests, threats disguised as concerned messages, and support from veterans organizations that had been skeptical of his investigation, but now pledged solidarity. Senator Whitmore responded with his own press conference, moved up from Thursday to tonight in response to breaking news. Garrett watched on the Safe House television as Whitmore stood before cameras with the practiced gravitas of someone who'd survived political crises through superior media management. I want to address the serious allegations made by Mr. Garrett Sullivan, a veteran I deeply respect, despite our current disagreement. Mr. Sullivan has suffered tremendous loss. His mobility, his wife, years of struggling with disabilities that would break lesser men. I understand his anger, his need to find someone responsible for tragedies that feel senseless. Whitmore's expression conveyed sympathy calibrated for maximum camera effectiveness. But anger doesn't justify baseless accusations of murder and fraud against an organization that has helped thousands of veterans. Jade muted the television. Classic misdirection. Acknowledge your pain, express sympathy, then frame your evidence as grief-driven fantasy. FBI Thornton's phone rang. She answered, listened, and her expression shifted from professional composure to something harder. When how many she made notes, ended the call and looked at Garrett. Dr. Rachel Brennan's house is on fire. Arson investigators estimate it started 30 minutes ago. Fire department arrived too late to save the structure. They found remains, dental records pending, but preliminary assessment suggests adult female. The room became very quiet. Diesel whined, sensing tension he couldn't identify but responding to anyway. Garrett's voice emerged flat, emptied of everything except the need to confirm what he already knew. Her son, no child remains found. Either Owen wasn't home or FBI Thornton didn't finish the alternatives equally terrible. Dr. Brennan had called 8 hours ago, risked everything to provide evidence, asked only that someone protect her son if things went wrong. Things had gone wrong with the methodical efficiency that came from organizations experienced in eliminating problems. His phone buzzed, text from unknown number. Dr. Brennan's dead man switch just triggered, evidence uploading to news outlets now. But her son is alive, we have him. Withdraw your testimony. Friday or Owen Brennan dies the same way his mother did. You have until Thursday midnight to decide. The message included a photo young boy, maybe 5 years old, crying zip-tied to a chair in a room with concrete walls and no windows. Owen's face carried the particular terror of children who'd watched their world collapse into nightmare they couldn't comprehend or escape. Jade read over Garrett's shoulder, her breath catching. They killed her and took him, used his life to leverage yours. FBI Thornton was already mobilizing calls to field offices, alerts to tactical teams, coordination with local police for missing child protocols. But everyone in the room understood that conventional law enforcement moved too slowly, required too much evidence, operated under constraints that didn't bind people willing to murder mothers and kidnap children. The television, still muted, showed breaking news alerts scrolling across screens. Dr. Brennan's dead man's switch had activated exactly as she'd programmed, flooding media with documentation that made Garrett's complaint look restrained by comparison. Bank transfers showing Senator Whitmore personally profited $300 million. Payment records for 14 contract killings. Email chains discussing how to neutralize investigators and silence whistleblowers. America was learning in real time that one of their senators had built a criminal empire disguised as veterans charity, and the woman who'd exposed him had just died in a fire that arson investigators were already calling suspicious. Senator Whitmore's press conference dissolved into chaos, reporters shouting questions about murder and fraud, cameras zooming in on a man whose carefully constructed sympathy was cracking under evidence he couldn't dismiss or deflect. Garrett stared at Owen's photo, seeing terror in a child's eyes that mirrored what Jade must have felt when Beth died. What every family member felt when violence arrived and took someone they loved. The equation was simple, brutal, inescapable. Testify Friday and Owen died. Withdrawal and Dr. Brennan's sacrifice meant nothing. 14 murders remained unpunished, and corruption survived because fear worked better than justice. Jade's voice cut through his spiral. We find him. Deadline is Thursday midnight, that's 28 hours. Enough time to locate and extract one 5-year-old from captivity. FBI Thornton looks skeptical. This is a federal kidnapping. We follow protocols, contact tracing, digital forensics, coordinated search with local jurisdictions. Your protocols got Dr. Brennan killed and her son taken. Jade's expression hardened into something Garrett recognized from the restaurant when she'd faced Preston's gang. Golden Horizon doesn't follow rules. They murder and kidnap because they've corrupted the systems designed to stop them. So we operate outside those systems. Lieutenant Sullivan, I understand your frustration, but unauthorized tactical operations against American citizens on domestic soil violates everything except the oath I swore to protect Americans from threats foreign and domestic. Owen Brennan qualifies as American who needs protecting. She turned to Garrett. Dad, you have contacts from your investigation. People you interviewed, veterans who shared information about Golden Horizon's operations. Anyone mention facilities they use, properties owned by shell companies? Garrett's mind raced through 9 months of conversations, documents, reviewed patterns noticed but not understood at the time. 3 properties stood out. Industrial warehouse in Port of Los Angeles, supposedly used for equipment storage but requires security clearance to access. Ranch property in Riverside County owned by Meridian Holdings where Preston Whitmore posts photos. And an office building in Beverly Hills that Golden Horizon lists as satellite headquarters but has no employees working there. Jade pulled up maps on her tablet. Warehouse's 2 public port authority has surveillance worker traffic makes secret detention impossible. Ranch property is possible, but isolated requires long transport time. My money's on the Beverly Hills building. If you're holding a kidnapped child, you take him somewhere that appears legitimate, where evidence can be sanitized quickly if necessary. FBI Thornton's phone rang again. She answered, her expression shifting from bureaucratic frustration to something harder. Understood. We're moving now. She ended the call, looked at Garrett. Deputy Attorney General Harrigan just issued formal authorization for hostage rescue operation. FBI hostage rescue team is mobilizing, but they need 4 hours minimum to assemble and deploy from Quantico. Owen doesn't have 4 hours to waste waiting. Jade was already moving, checking her weapon, calling Diesel to position. They gave us 28-hour deadline, knowing federal response takes longer than that. By the time HRT arrives, Owen's either dead or relocated. Lieutenant, I cannot authorize unsupported tactical operation. Then don't authorize it. Arrest me after I bring Owen back alive. Jade stopped at the door, looked at her father with expression that asked permission he didn't have authority to grant but would give anyway. Dad, I need you to trust I can do this. Not hope I can trust with absolute certainty that I'm capable of rescuing one child from one building. Every parental instinct screamed at Garrett to forbid this, to insist she wait for official teams with proper backup. But those instincts assumed his daughter was civilian who needed protection rather than warrior who provided it. Bring him home, Jade. She nodded once, acknowledgement and promise combined, then was gone. Diesel at her heels, both of them flowing into darkness with the purposeful silence of predators who'd spent years perfecting the art of controlled violence. FBI Thornton stared at the door. She's going to get herself killed. Maybe, but she's also the best chance Owen has. Garrett rolled his wheelchair to the window, watching Jade's Jeep accelerate down the dirt road with lights off. My daughter doesn't fail missions. The next hours stretched with the particular agony of waiting while someone you love walks into danger you can't protect them from. FBI Thornton coordinated with hostage rescue team, providing them intelligence from Dr. Brennan's files about the Beverly Hills building's layout and security systems. Garrett reviewed evidence for his testimony, trying to distract himself from calculating all the ways Jade's rescue attempt could end badly. At 10:37 p.m., Garrett's secure phone rang. Jade's voice emerged, slightly breathless but controlled. Package secure. Heading to your location. Advise FBI to have medical standing by Owen's dehydrated and traumatized, but physically unharmed. Relief hit Garrett like physical force. You're okay. Minor laceration, nothing serious. Diesel took a taser meant for me, but he's functional. We had company 4 contractors, all alive but requiring medical attention themselves. She paused, and Garrett heard a child crying in the background. Dad Owen keeps asking for his mother. I told him she's waiting for him, didn't have the heart to. Her voice broke slightly. I didn't know what else to say. You saved his life. That's enough for now. The rest we figure out together. She arrived 40 minutes later carrying Owen wrapped in her tactical jacket. The boy had cried himself into exhausted silence, his face swollen from tears and fear. FBI Thornton immediately took custody, coordinating with the child services while EMTs checked Owen for injuries. Jade sat heavily, wincing as she moved. The laceration on her arm was deeper than she'd admitted, requiring stitches, but she'd ignored it during the extraction. Diesel limped to his water bowl, the taser hit having affected his mobility, but not his determination. How many contractors? 4 providing security, 2 more arrived during extraction. I tracked phone signals from the photo they sent. Metadata included GPS coordinates. She accepted water from FBI. Thornton drank half the bottle. Infiltrated through rooftop access, located Owen in a 3rd-floor office, converted to holding cell. Extraction took 11 minutes total. FBI Thornton's tablet buzzed. LAPD just raided the building. Found evidence of Owen's detention, plus documentation that Golden Horizon's been using the location for meetings that don't appear in any official records. His phone buzzed. Another unknown number. You think rescuing the boy changes anything? Withdraw your testimony or we escalate beyond anything you've imagined. He showed the message to FBI Thornton. She read it, her expression hardening. They're desperate, Doctor. Brennan's evidence is demolishing their credibility. Media's treating this as scandal of the decade. And now we've recovered their hostage. They're losing control. Jade stood. Then we don't stay here. We relocate to position they can't anticipate. Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. Military installation with armed sentries, controlled access, and several hundred SEALs who get personally offended when people threaten their teammates' families. FBI Thornton considered pragmatism winning over procedure. Make the arrangements. We move at 0400. The next hours blurred into preparation and relocation, coordinating with Navy officials who didn't ask questions when told a SEAL needed support, moving Garrett's evidence to secure locations that existed in gray zones between military and civilian authority. Owen Brennan was placed with emergency foster services under assumed name, protected by federal marshals. Senator Whitmore held another press conference Thursday afternoon, this time flanked by lawyers who carefully parsed every word. He called Dr. Brennan's evidence fabrication, called Garrett's investigation harassment, called the entire scandal politically motivated. But the anger in his voice betrayed him. Federal prosecutors announced criminal investigations. Congressional colleagues who'd supported him suddenly discovered scheduling conflicts. The architecture of protection he'd built was disassembling as people decided proximity to scandal outweighed loyalty. Thursday night, Garrett sat in bachelor officer quarters on Coronado reviewing testimony he'd deliver in 18 hours. The words felt inadequate. Dry recitation of financial fraud couldn't capture the human cost. Jade entered carrying coffee. You ready? I don't know. 9 months building this case and now it feels insufficient. She sat beside him, took his hand. Then don't just recite numbers. Tell them about Mom. Tell them what it's like to watch your wife die, thinking it's tragedy, then learn years later it was murder. Tell them about Dr. Brennan, who spent 20 months documenting crimes knowing discovery meant death. Tell them about Owen, who's 5 years old and doesn't understand why men with guns took him. Her voice carried intensity that suggested she understood testimony wasn't just evidence presentation, but moral witness. Make them feel it, Dad. Make it impossible for them to hide behind procedural detachment. He revised his testimony, adding personal narrative to financial documentation, weaving Beth's story through the evidence. By midnight, he had something that felt true, not just factually accurate, but emotionally honest about cost of corruption measured in human lives. Sleep came fitfully. He woke at 5 a.m. to Jade already in dress uniform. Navy whites with ribbons representing deployments she couldn't discuss, transformed from tactical operator to official representative. Showing Congress what SEALs look like when we're not in combat zones, she explained. Reminding them that you're not isolated, disabled veteran, you're father of someone who's proven her credibility. The drive to Washington, D.C. happened on military transport, FBI coordination with Navy, ensuring Garrett reached the Capitol under a protection that combined federal law enforcement with military security. The congressional hearing room filled with cameras, journalists, protesters, holding signs supporting veterans and demanding accountability. Senator Whitmore sat at the dais looking diminished, his lawyer whispering strategies that wouldn't save him. Other committee members maintained careful neutrality, politicians calculating whether association damaged them more than abandonment helped. Garrett wheeled to the witness table, Jade taking position behind him in dress uniform, Diesel sitting alert beside her, a family united against corruption that had stolen from all of them. The committee chairman called the hearing to order. Garrett began speaking, his voice steady despite everything riding on this moment. He recited evidence first, the financial documentation, the shell companies, the offshore accounts. Then he told them about Beth, about loving someone whose death he'd mourned as accident before learning it was murder. About Dr. Brennan, whose courage cost her life, but whose evidence would destroy the organization she'd died exposing. About Owen, who'd survived kidnapping, but lost his mother to people who treated her death as acceptable cost. He spoke for 90 minutes, interrupted occasionally by questions from committee members who alternated between genuine horror and performative outrage. When he finished, the room sat silent, not thoughtful quiet, but stunned absence of sound that came from revelations too enormous to process immediately. Then the chairman spoke, his voice carrying gravitas of someone who understood they were witnessing history. Mr. Sullivan, on behalf of this committee and the veterans you fought to protect, I thank you for your courage. What you've endured, the loss of your wife, the threats against your family, the systematic attempts to silence your investigation, represents the worst kind of betrayal. Senator Whitmore tried to speak to offer defense, but his lawyer pulled him back. The optics were too damaged, the evidence too overwhelming. The hearing concluded with chairman announcing immediate investigation, freezing Golden Horizon's assets and referring criminal charges to Justice Department. FBI agents approached Senator Whitmore with arrest warrant charges, including fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder. He was cuffed and led from the chamber while cameras captured his humiliation. Outside, Garrett faced media demanding interviews. He kept it brief. Beth Sullivan died because I asked questions, Doctor. Rachel Brennan died because she answered them. This isn't about me or Golden Horizon. It's about whether America protects veterans who protected America, or whether we allow their sacrifice to be monetized by criminals. The quote crystallized complex scandal into moral clarity that transcended partisan division. Veterans organizations rallied support. Congressional members who'd accepted Golden Horizon donations scrambled to return money. 3 weeks later, federal prosecutors had secured indictments against Senator Whitmore, Victor Blackwell, and 47 others connected to Golden Horizon. $3.1 billion was recovered and redistributed to actual veteran services, housing grants, medical care, education programs that had been denied while executives bought vacation properties. Garrett sat in the safe house living room, paperwork spread before him. Emergency foster custody documents for Owen Brennan, who'd been living with him for 2 weeks while permanent arrangements were finalized. The boy was healing slowly, nightmares fading as stability replaced trauma. Jade entered back in civilian clothes now that her role as protector had evolved. She'd been working with veterans organizations, translating her tactical skills into advocacy work. Owen's asking about adoption timelines again. Garrett looked up from the paperwork. What did you tell him? That bureaucracy moves slow, but we're not going anywhere. That he's family now, regardless of what the forms say. She sat across from him. You sure about this? When raising a 5-year-old at 58 in a wheelchair while managing PTSD from everything that's happened. I'm sure that Owen lost his mother because his mother helped me. I'm sure that Dr. Brennan's last words to me were asking someone to protect her son. I'm sure that leaving him in the system would dishonor her sacrifice. He met his daughter's eyes. And I'm sure that Beth would have wanted this. She always said family isn't who you're born to, it's who you choose to stand with when things get hard. Jade smiled, reaching across to squeeze his hand. Mom would be proud of both of us. Owen appeared in the doorway, clutching the stuffed dog. Jade had bought him something to hold when nightmares came. Garrett, can Diesel sleep in my room tonight? Of course, buddy. Diesel, go. The dog stood walk to Owen with the gentle patience he'd developed around the traumatized child and followed him down the hall. Garrett heard Owen's door close, heard the boy talking to Diesel in the soft voice children use when they're processing fears too big for their understanding. He called you Garrett, not Mr. Sullivan, Jade observed. That's progress. Small steps. Yesterday he told me his favorite color. Day before he laughed at something on TV. Moments like that matter more than legal documents. His phone buzzed, not a threat this time, but a message from FBI Thornton. Final arrest warrant executed. Victor Blackwell in custody. 52 total arrests. Senator Whitmore's trial date set for January. You did it, Mr. Sullivan. He showed Jade the message. She read it, then stood and walked to the window overlooking the San Diego harbor. It's really over. This part is. But there are other golden horizons out there. Other organizations exploiting veterans, other senators taking bribes, other Dr. Brennans waiting for someone to help them speak up. He rolled his wheelchair beside her. I've been thinking about starting a foundation. Beth's name, Dr. Brennan's legacy, focused on financial literacy for disabled veterans, teaching people how to recognize fraud, how to investigate corruption, how to fight back when institutions fail them. That's ambitious. You sure you have time with Owen and everything? I have time because I'm not doing it alone. I have a daughter who's proven she can accomplish impossible things. I have a community of veterans who've rallied around this investigation. I have resources now, recovered money, media attention, credibility. I didn't have 9 months ago. He looked at her. And I have purpose. Beth died fighting corruption. Dr. Brennan died exposing it. I can't bring them back, but I can make their deaths count for something beyond putting criminals in prison. Jade turned from the window and he saw tears on her cheeks, not sadness, but the overflow of emotion that came from watching someone transform grief into legacy. When do we start? Monday. I have meetings with 3 veterans organizations interested in partnering, legal teams drafting nonprofit paperwork. And I thought maybe you could run the tactical training division, teaching vets how to conduct investigations safely, how to protect themselves when they challenge power. She wiped her eyes, laughing at herself. Navy SEAL turned nonprofit director. Mom would find that hilarious. Mom would find it perfect. She always said the best warriors aren't the ones who win battles. They're the ones who prevent battles from needing to be fought in the first place. Owen's door opened. The boy emerged, Diesel at his side, carrying a drawing he'd made in therapy. He approached Garrett shyly, held it out. I made this. For you. Garrett took the paper. Crayon drawing, stick figures, representing a man in wheelchair, a woman in uniform, a dog and a small boy holding their hands. Above them, 2 more figures with wings and halos. The therapist had clearly helped him process loss through art. This is beautiful, Owen. Who are the angels? My mom and your wife. The therapist said they're watching us from heaven. He pointed at the stick figures below. And this is our family now. You, Jade, Diesel, and me. Is that okay? Garrett's throat tightened. He pulled Owen into a hug, feeling the boy's small arms wrap around his neck, with the tentative trust of someone learning that not all adults disappeared or died. That's more than okay, buddy. That's perfect. Jade joined the hug, Diesel pressing against their legs, and for a moment they stayed like that. A family forged not from blood, but from shared loss and chosen loyalty from the wreckage of corruption and the determination to build something better from the ruins. Later that night, after Owen was asleep and Jade had returned to her own apartment, Garrett sat alone on the deck watching stars emerge against the darkening sky. He thought about Beth, about the argument they'd had the night before she died, about all the things he'd never gotten to say because he'd assumed there would be time. He thought about Dr. Brennan, who'd spent 20 months building evidence, knowing every day might be her last, who'd asked only that someone protect her son and had trusted a stranger to honor that request. He thought about the 14 other victims whose names filled Dr. Brennan's files, whose families deserved to know their deaths hadn't been random or accidental, but calculated murders designed to protect billion-dollar fraud. And he thought about the future, about Owen growing up, knowing his mother died a hero, about veterans receiving benefits they'd earned, about organizations like Golden Horizon, finding it harder to exploit American gratitude because people like Garrett refused to stay silent. The fight wasn't finished. More corruption existed. More families would need advocates. More Dr. Brennans would risk everything hoping someone would help them. But tonight, for this moment, justice had been served. Not perfect justice. Beth and Dr. Brennan were still dead. Owen was still orphaned. 14 families still carried loss that no verdict could restore. But Senator Whitmore awaited trial. Golden Horizon was dismantled. $3 billion was being used to actually help veterans instead of enriching criminals. And one 5-year-old boy was learning to sleep through the night without screaming, Was learning that family could be chosen rather than lost, was learning that his mother's courage had meant something beyond her death. Garrett's phone buzzed one final time. Text from Jade. Proud of you, Dad. Mom would be too. Get some sleep. Monday we change the world. He smiled, sent back a simple reply. Already did. Monday we just do it again. Inside, Diesel had positioned himself outside Owen's door, eternal guardian, patient protector, living reminder that some loyalties transcended orders and training to become something deeper. The dog's presence meant Owen would wake safe if nightmares came, would have someone who'd proven their willingness to take tasers and bullets to keep him protected. Garrett wheeled himself inside, locked the doors, set the alarm system FBI had installed. The precautions were probably unnecessary now. Golden Horizon's leadership was in custody, their contractors had scattered, their operation was destroyed. But caution had kept them alive this long, and survival required maintaining vigilance even after victory. He transferred from wheelchair to bed, the familiar choreography of disabled life made easier by modifications he'd installed over years of adaptation. Tomorrow, he'd call Owen's school, confirm enrollment for fall semester. He'd finalize adoption paperwork with lawyers who'd volunteered their services pro bono after seeing his testimony. He'd start building the foundation that would transform Beth's death and Dr. Brennan's sacrifice into lasting impact. But tonight, he let himself rest. Let the weight of 9 months fighting corruption finally lift from shoulders that had carried it too long. Let himself believe that standing up to power hadn't been futile gesture but necessary action, not because it changed everything, but because accepting corruption meant accepting that some people mattered less than money, and that was a world not worth living in. Sleep came easier than it had in months, untroubled by nightmares of contractors and kidnappers and senators who ordered murders. And if he dreamed of Beth smiling as she watched him raise another woman's son, and of Dr. Brennan's ghost whispering thanks across the distance between the living and the dead.